Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to be diving into the vital aspect of understanding when to use a specific statistics. For example, what is the difference between a arithmetic mean and the geometric mean, and when should we use those? Also, when is it best to use the median? So let's dive into our real world task so we can get started. So here's a typical request you may get. Dear analysts, I hope you're doing well. I'm currently strategizing for the next quarter, and it would be incredibly beneficial to have a comprehensive analysis of our past year's revenue trends. I'm particularly interested in understanding our average monthly revenue, monthly growth rate, and as well as predictions for the coming month based on these rates. It would also be helpful to have this data visualized in a user-friendly manner. Looking forward to discussing your insights at our next team meeting. So let's highlight what's important here. So we all know that we need to provide revenue trends. Also, they want an understanding of average monthly revenue, monthly growth rates, prediction for the coming month, and they want this visualized. So now we have our task laid out in front of us. Now we can know that our primary goal is to understand past revenue performance and forecast future revenue. That is our overall objective. And the manager is looking to gain insight that will inform strategic decisions for the upcoming quarter. So what trends are going to be important for us to look at? Revenue growth, seasonality, month-on-month fluctuations, outliers, growth rate trend, and revenue concentration. So that is what we are going to provide in our final analysis. So just a quick summary for the statistical concepts that we're going to cover. We're going to cover the arithmetic mean, the geometric mean, median, growth rate, and some simple forecasting. So let's jump into the data and get started. So here's our data set where we have the date by day and revenue. And remember that our task was to get the monthly revenue. So what we need to do is group this data. And the easiest way to group data, we can group it by using a pivot table. Now I'm going to go over to home and just make sure this is in the date format. It's not always necessary, but I'll show you why it's helpful. So all I need to do is click into any section here, go to Insert. We're going to go to Pivot Table. Then we're going to create a new sheet. And on that new sheet, I'm going to call this Pivot just by right-clicking and adding that. And you can see here, now we have the date. And once we click into it, it breaks it down to month. And you can see we have the month here. I'm going to bring that revenue in, and there we have our pivot table. I am going to simply just copy and paste this all the way up to the December date. Click a new sheet, and I'm going to right-click and paste this as values. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to call this our revenue for now. And then we call this our date. And now we can begin building our analysis. So let's call this sheet analysis. It'd be very helpful for you to like and subscribe before we move on to the analysis. Don't forget, that helps the channel. So the first thing we want to do is get the growth rate for each one of these months. So let's zoom in so we get a look at that. And what I'm going to do is create a column called growth rate. And simply what I'm going to do is for the first line, there's no growth because we don't have data before it. So we're going to move down to the second line. We're going to do equal. And we are going to do a simple formula, which is the present value minus the previous value. We will encapsulate that in parentheses, so that runs first. And then we're going to divide by the previous value to get the growth rate. And then now that we have this, we can just click this down and we have our growth rate. So you may just be tempted to take the average of the growth rate. However, that may not be the right process. We need to take in consideration what we call compounding. So typically when you take an average, you are going to sum this amount and divide by the number of entries, in this case 12. However, if we do this with the growth rate, we are not considering compounding. If you know what compounding is adding as something grows over time. For example, if we have a tree starts out at 100%. As it grows year on year, it may have a growth rate of 10%. So year 1, we are at 100%. Year 2, we are at 110%. Year 3, we are at 120%. So that growth rate keeps getting added on top of each other. So what we can do is use the geometric mean to capture that compounding. So let's look at when we use arithmetic mean versus the geometric mean. When we're dealing with raw data, such as the revenue, it's better to use the arithmetic mean, which is the same as an average. The geometric mean is dealing with rates or multiplicative data like growth rate. To find the average value in a data set, we use the arithmetic mean, while in a geometric mean, we're trying to find the average rate of growth considering compounding. Examples, average monthly revenue or calculating the average monthly growth rate. So you can see when we should use one of these means over another. So let's bring both of them in to get an idea what's the difference. So the geometric mean is made by multiplying these growth rates and then taking the root is the formula. However, we're lucky enough in Excel we have this formula. So let's do both the arithmetic mean and the geometric mean. So here I'm just going to write arithmetic mean, and then here I'm going to write the geometric mean. And here we already know we just take the average to get the mean, and if we're taking the average growth rate, we are just going to hit enter. Now if we're trying to take the geometric mean, we need to use geo. Now if I highlight this formula, you can see it returns the geometric mean of an array, which this is our array or range here, of positive numeric data. Now look at what we have in July. July is not positive. So if I just tried to use this formula and capture all of these, you can see we get an error. Now what we need to do is add a 1, because as we talked about previously with the tree example, this is not going to go negative. It's going to grow as a tree does year on year. It might go down a little bit, but it's not going to be negative because it's already grown. So we take into consideration compounding. So I can put a +1 there and hit enter. Now this does not give us the average percentage because it gives us this 1, and to just get rid of that 1 we can just hit -1, and now we get the overall geometric mean. And naturally this is a little bit more conservative than this number typically. Now you may also need to press Control Shift and enter. So for example, if I take this formula, sometime depending on your Excel version, you might need to wrap this in a sum product, and let me just show you how that's done. So I put sum product, and then I just encapsulate this in, and then I press Control Shift enter, and you can see we get the same value, but I am just going to minus the 1, and we get the same value, depending on your Excel. So now we have our 12 months. We want to be able to predict the next January, and we need to consider a few things when doing this. Now, the one way we can do it is take our average growth rate, which is, we have the arithmetic and the geometric mean, and we can just simply take our last value here, which is in December, and then multiply it by 1 plus our growth rate, and that will give us the total number. And then I can say this is January next year. That's our prediction. Now, we can also do this as our conservative. Other one, we can use the, because this is always going to be smaller, so we can also use the same approach. So I am just going to copy this, go to the next cell, and then all I need to do is go to this formula here and say 1 plus F3, I believe it is. And then we can have our other value. So we have our conservative and aggressive prediction. Now, at this point, it probably looks a little bit better if we turn these into currencies. So let's do that so we get a better idea. Now, the next thing we want to do is consider seasonality. And in order to do that, we may have to take a few steps, because when we are calculating things, we are making an assumption that there is no seasonality in the data. For example, if we look at this, January is the lowest month. Now, that could be because of the data itself, but we don't have previous year's data to know if January is always a low month. So we're going to take a few extra steps to give them some options in our analysis. So let's visualize our data very quickly, so to get a better idea of seasonality. So I'm going to take these two columns here, which is date and revenue, and highlight those. Go to Insert, and I'm going to go to Recommended Charts, and I'm going to choose this area chart here. And you can see what happens is, we can see in January, we can see a linear increase, and then we see a dip in July, and then we see that increase again. Now, there could be something cyclical or seasonality happening. Maybe every 6 months we see a dip. So, and we also see that represented in our growth rate here. So now what I'm going to do, I am just going to get the date here, and I'm going to get the growth rate, and I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to go to Recommended Charts, and you can see we have some options. I'm going to choose this chart here, and this chart is going to give us a little bit more information to show. I'm going to change these labels so we can get a better look at those as percent. So I'm going to go to number, and then I'm going to change this to a percentage, and I think that's good enough. And we can optimize these later, but what I wanted to show you is maybe we have some seasonality. So a way to get another metric here, let's say for a seasonal forecast, we can take the forecast here, so equals and forecast, and then you can see we have one for seasonality here. Now, if I click this, you can see this takes a timeline. Now, at the moment, our dates are not in timeline, but we can fix that very easily just by making a date here. So I'm going to put 1/1/2022, and I'm going to put 2, 1, 20, and then I copy those two, I'll highlight those two and just bring it all down, and I'm going to call that my timeline. It should be I'll move this over slightly just by pulling everything over and highlighting it, and now I'm going to get the seasonal forecast here. So I'm going to go equals and then forecast, and you can see we have exponential triple smoothing seasonality. So I'm going to bring in that function, and the values that we're trying to predict, remember, are the revenue, and I am going to get the timeline that we have here. Then we don't need to worry about the data completion or the aggregation because we know what we are bringing in. So you don't need to bring those in. You can hit enter. And then you can see what it gives us seasonality as there's no seasonality. Now, there is not enough information for us to get any seasonal figures. So what we can do, we can just assume forecast. And let me make this bigger. And then I'm going to put equals and then forecast again. And then you can see we have ETS here. So I'm going to bring that in. And then you can see we can enter the seasonality. So we predict our target date. Now our target date we need to enter here. So our target date is going to be 1. Let me go back out. Our target date here is going to be 1/1/2023 because we're trying to predict that next month, which is January. So I can also put that here as Jan. And then I put equals and ETS equals forecast, ETS. Our target date is here. Then we go to the values are here. The timeline is here without the new date there. And we will leave the seasonality blank and data completion and aggregation blank. So I hit enter. And you can see what we've gotten is a forecast here. And this forecast is going to be more of a linear forecast, but you can see it's not as high. And we still haven't added our growth metric, but let me just show you what we can do. You can see the next argument, if I press comma here, is seasonality. So let's say our seasonal period is every 6 months. Because if we had 24 months of data, we would be able to see the seasonality. And maybe every July there is a drop, and maybe we have a 6-month seasonality in January. So if I added this, you can see the drop there would be significant as opposed to the 31,000 that we saw before. Now we have no idea if this is correct at all. You can see I can say there's a 12-month seasonality. If I change that to 12, and the number changes back. So we'll leave it at a 6-month seasonality just as a guess. Maybe it's every 6 months we see a drop, so maybe we'll have a drop in January, but we are just assuming. Now that we have that number, we want to multiply it by our growth rate, which is 1.10. And it went to date, but we can go back over and change this back to a number. And now we have our seasonal growth period. I'll change this over back to a currency. Now what we have is all the information that we need to provide a walkthrough of our findings. And let's fix the spelling of seasonal just here as a small. So our last step is to flip back over to our original data here, and let's get the average in the median. Daily value, because we can see this broken up daily. So I'm going to put average, and then I'm just going to click on that first value and then Control Shift and down, and then it'll give me the average here. Now I am just going to also get the median, so median, and the median returns the number in the middle of the set of the given numbers. So your average or your arithmetic mean is going to be affected by outliers or high values. So if we take the median here and we just click that first number, Control Shift and down and enter, you see that is a bit lower. I'm going to turn this into currencies. And now if we get the maximum value here, we can see why it's being affected because the average here is higher. So if I go down and get all of that, and you can see that we have our average there is quite high. We have $1,000 on one day. So we have our average or the arithmetic mean, our median, which is going to give us the middle value, and then our max. So we know that the average is being pulled up by this high value. So now let's add this all to our narrative and give our visualization or data story to our management. So all we've done here is get all our data in one place in a PowerPoint presentation. So what we wanted to do is tell a story with our data and give it engaging visuals and titles and headings to make sure our reader is paying attention to all the work that we put into our analysis. So you can see we have catchy titles like Unwavering Revenue Growth with a July twist. And then we have Positive Forecast for the Future and Outlier in July raises questions. So what we've done here is put our visuals here, and I changed the styles a little bit. You can just do this by changing the chart styles or use different chartings that you think is a little bit more engaging. So what you can see under my first heading, Positive Forecast for the Future, at 10% average growth rate in 2022, which we calculated using that geometric mean, we expect to have a conservative revenue of $39,635 as the forecast without seasonality for January 2023. If we account for seasonality, we expect $27,208. Also, based on historical performance, the median daily performance is $686. And the reason I like to add the daily value, because sometimes people want to just multiply that by 30 and say, hey, why don't we use that as our forecast? Now, for our low performing months, I wanted to call these out because even though we can see them here, sometimes it's better to call them out. So I said April, May, and September has single digit as our growth rate, and we had a significant drop of 33% here in July, which makes them focus on what's going on in July. Recommendations that I put under the heading Outlier in July raises questions. For the recommendation, explore if there are seasonal changes each 6 months. That was a 6 month that we put in our calculation as a guess by reviewing next year's performance. And essential questions, and then we actually have a little typo here. We just put by, we don't need to cap that off. And let's add a period. And then we wanted to add the last essential questions. Were there any external factors which would drive the dip in growth in July? And sometime in the meeting, someone might say, yes, we turned off marketing. Or yes, we had problems with technical tracking. So it's always good to have an essential questionnaire to keep the conversation going and possibly get an answer. So that is our analysis using geometric and arithmetic mean to understand revenue growth rates. So I would love to see if you guys come up with any type of analysis that's slightly different or different visuals. If this was helpful, please share, like, and subscribe. Thank you.